Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to the Institute for Personal Development, Kriya Yoga Ashram, where total consciousness is the new frontier.
Kriya Yoga is union of the individual with the divine. Join us as we explore the practices to initiate this process.
Good morning. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. Let's talk consciousness. I am your hostess, Lisa Winton, and with me is Kenny Toy, also known as Swami Jayananda, founder of the Institute for Personal Development, located here in Hampton, New Hampshire. Good morning, Swami. Thank you for being here today. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing pretty good today. How about you?
Well, I'm doing great today, too. Thanks for asking. And I'd like to thank you all for tuning in. Today on the Voice of Yoga, we will talk about television as a limited experience perceived as an unreal occurrence when measured from a broader five-sense perspective. In this show, we will make a similar comparison by evaluating sense versus spiritual perception. Listen as we explain the function of spiritual sense to dissolve the false beliefs of sense-level living. In John 8:32, "And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. We are talking consciousness. Join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance to get the light in your soul and live with spiritual capacities. Swami, today's title of the show is Televised with Sight and Sound. So what is it that we mean by that for this show?
Yeah, I think what we're trying to do is create some sort of comparison as to when we're looking at a TV program that gives us a way of looking at something that we could say isn't real. And according to the title, one of the things that we would use to establish this reality check is our senses. So when you're watching television or you're at the movies, you're working with sight and sound. But then that leaves touch, taste, and smell inactive. And so that's one of the ways that when we step away from something like that, we can use touch, taste, and smell to kind of give us a better way of employing a reality check. One of the things I always remember is you would say to somebody, "Pinch me. Am I awake? Am I sleeping?" And so in this show, what we really want to try and do is move beyond sense level living. And we want to be able to use our spiritual senses now as a means of being able to determine that what we were calling real on a sense level, on a spirit level, would be considered unreal.
So if we were to watch a television, movie, program, whatever, how would we watch that using a spiritual sense as opposed to our material human sense?
Well, I don't think that's exactly what it is that I'm talking about. I don't think you will ever watch television with spiritual sense. In a similar situation, it's kind of like I don't think you can ever get your email with a calculator. Spiritual sense works in a completely different medium, in a completely different dimension of reality. Spiritual sense is what lets us know that there is a divine creation that isn't reporting in our corporeal senses, that is right here and right now. But what we want to be able to do is use our corporeal senses to give us an understanding of how well we understand spiritual sense. Because it is absolutely impossible for you to be anything less than perfect. For your life to be anything less than perfect is an impossibility. Because perfection is the only life there is. Now, that's the life of the divine creation. But what we're trying to do here is we want to accept that perfect life as the life that I am.
So, Swami, you say that perfection is the only life there is. So the only life that we're aware of is what is in our corporeal senses, what we see, what's around us.
Well, that's the other thing that we've been really employing in these shows is we're saying consciousness is experience. This is a 180-degree flip from the way we're socialized. Once I started studying divine science, I remember reading a work by Bicknell Young, and in his work he said, "It is not the eye that creates vision. It is vision that creates the eye." And so when spirit is cause, it's a very different thing than when you are perceiving reality that there are material causes. Cause and effect is all part of duality. As our perception shifts from material to mental to spiritual, we perceive things very differently. When we're perceiving things from a spiritual sense, we're working with the divine idea. We're starting with the perfection of being. And the way that we're socialized to think, well, that's not even a possibility.
So I think what you're saying is we have to look around us and also at ourselves, realize what we're out picturing is coming from our level of consciousness. Is that correct?
Exactly. Once you are realizing that how we think is what we become, and then you're also exposed to these higher states of awareness. There are different ways of thinking than thinking with our corporeal senses, or at least better ways of expressing terms like reality. And when you're starting with the belief in matter, you're behind the eight ball. You're on the wrong side of the equation, and you really can't make any sense out of anything. Once you're willing to move beyond sense-level living, you're starting to work with understanding spirit is a present activity, that it is right here and it's right now and it's functioning. It is maintaining a perfect universe, and that what we're dealing with is just a thought about that. And so we're learning to come out of our modes of mortal thinking, which is interpreted as stop thinking, and without forming thoughts and opinions any longer based on information that is stimulating these corporeal senses, we make our mind an avenue of awareness for the presence of the divine creation. And the divine creation doesn't report in our corporeal senses, but once we stop thinking, then we begin to activate spiritual sense. And then we're perceiving things in a completely different perspective. And that perspective changes how we're thinking, which in turn changes what we will experience. That is basically how Jesus and people like Mary Baker Eddy are able to perform what appears to corporeal sense as a miracle.
Well, let's talk more about evaluating sense versus the spiritual perception. So are we able to look at what's going on around us and we see it through our corporeal senses, but is there also a way that we can look around what's going on and then view it through some type of spiritual perception?
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was saying. The divine creation is perfect. So we start with perfection. We know that everything is perfect. That's why I say it is impossible for you to be anything less than perfect. And that perfection is backed by divine law. It's the only power in this universe. Now what we're looking at is what I'm calling life, and what are all of these imperfections that are appearing in my reality. And so if you don't have the divine idea and you don't have the understanding of how everything is working, then we fall prey to what is appearing in our corporeal senses and we're reacting to it, but our belief in it is really where it maintains its appearance of having power. But if we can deny the testimony of our senses if we can reject what appears to be imperfection, and we hold our attention on knowing the truth. Why we put John 8:32, and ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Now this truth that life is perfect makes us free from the belief that it is imperfect. And once we let go of the belief, we start to rise above corporeal sense. We stop thinking. In that silence and in that stillness, we let this divine creation reveal itself to us. But again, it's not going to reveal itself to our material senses. It will reveal itself to our spiritual senses. That's another thing that we've always been saying, like attracts like. We can't be a finite mortal being with a belief in matter and communicate with a immortal, infinite, spiritual principle.
Well, let's talk more about John 8:32, and ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Free from what exactly? What do you think the Bible means by that?
Well, it frees us from the belief in duality. Truth is that there is one perfect divine life. Now, we believe in good and bad, right and wrong, and that breaks the continuity of the infinite, of the absolute. Now we have a second life. And so that drops us into this cycle of death and rebirth. But it's not real. Like we say, what we mean by real, it's not a self-sufficient power. It is not self-existent. It is relying on belief for its appearance of existence. It's not real in that respect. And we don't have to fix what is appearing in our senses because it isn't real. It's just a thought. It's an appearance about what is real, which is the perfection of being. And once we let go of our concepts and beliefs, and again, we let this spiritual light dawn on us and express itself through us, it dissolves the belief in the many, and now we understand ourselves from the perspective of the one life, the perfect one life, then it will start to outpicture as a divine experience.
You had mentioned earlier about something not being real. So it kind of reminds you of like when you're watching a movie, like you had said earlier, it kind of seems like our lives are like us watching a movie.
Well, that's exactly it. When you're in the movie, you're only working basically with sight and sound. So you can actually withdraw yourself from being in that hypnotic trance state the movie produces, and you can kind of, like I said earlier, pinch yourself and say, I'm not in danger here. Why is my heart racing, my hands sweating? Now what we're learning is that we can do a very similar thing with our spiritual senses. Each of us has 5 material senses, but there are also 7 spiritual capacities. Once we begin to cultivate them, we can now turn to spiritual perception that will dissolve the belief that we are a finite mortal being that is in any kind of potential risk or danger.
Well, we're going to pause right here to hear a word from our sponsor. So listeners, we'll be back with you in just a few moments. Kriya Yoga Theory 1, Human Development and the 8 Essential Stages of Kriya Yoga. This program is a comprehensive course that will help you get your arms around the science of Kriya Yoga. It provides a clear understanding of the goals and objectives behind yoga, along with the physics of spirituality. It includes the practices, supportive concepts of Kriya Yoga, and the process in human development, apotheosis, the process of the human becoming divine. A complete guide on how to become a human in the adult state. Get the light in your soul and experience the simplicity and joy of union with the divine. This course is available in live classes at the ashram or online with 8 videos or 4 CDs. Visit our website, www.ipdtransform.com, for more information. Welcome back. For those of you just joining us, you're listening to The Voice of Yoga, and we are talking consciousness. So, Swami, I think this is a good time to start talking about the levels of consciousness and how does that relate to what we're talking about?
Yeah, when we're looking at levels of consciousness, now when we're out of our corporeal or material senses, we're unconscious. However, when we are in spiritual sense, we're out of our material senses, but we're not unconscious. We're conscious of the divine creation. That's a very subtle distinction that we really want to start to understand. We're not just denying the testimony of our senses here. We're not just being senselessly optimistic. When you know the truth, when your whole sense of self is totally established in the understanding that you are the expression of an indestructible principle, you're the reflection of the perfection of being. That's very different than when you are unconscious to your corporeal senses. I always think of what C.S. Lewis said in regard to perfect love casts out fear. Well, so do lots of other things, like alcohol, drugs, stupidity. This isn't what we're talking about. The divine creation, the perfection of being, is a demonstrable principle. That if you are conscious of the divine creation, then it must be provable. And we prove it by activating it in our experiences. And this is how, again, we rise into our ability to overcome these false beliefs. Sickness, suffering, disease is not a divine creation. It's not backed by divine law. Rather than pleading and begging and asking God to heal my son or cure my cancer, we really want to start to understand that God can't give you anything because God isn't withholding anything. God's running a perfect universe right here and right now. And what we have to do is just give up the belief that we're separate from that we are not the reflection of the divine. This is what we're learning how to do here.
So getting back that we're not separated from God, and yet we still believe in good and bad, right and wrong, other forms of duality. So how do we get past that and get out of the movie?
Well, just like the scripture says, know the truth. We have to know that there is but one life. You have to know the commandments. Like Jesus said, if you love me, keep my commandments. And the first commandment is we can't have false gods before the one divine God. Now, most of us can accept that because we can accept one God. But we don't take it far enough so it's a demonstrable principle, which means that there is but one life. And that life is the perfect life of this one divine life. That's the life of God. It's perfect. It's eternal. It's unchanging. Now, I have to accept that as the only life that I can be. But the minute I believe in a second life, I break the continuity of the infinite, and I'm in this thought loop. I'm in this secondary creation about the divine creation that is driven by belief, but it's not real. And as long as I believe that I am a separate entity, and I'm not the reflection of this one divine life, then I'm under what's called the law of karma, with the belief in two powers. And that law of karma, what you put out is what you get back, is all driven by the love of God. This divine love will not let you accept anything less than the perfection of your being. And so it appears like it's punishment. But in truth, all it is a wake-up call. It's the ouch effect. It's trying to get us to, the term was called repent, think differently. You've got to wake up. You are not a finite mortal being with an expiration date, and that all of this imperfection, all of the suffering, the sickness, all of the violence and the pollution and everything else is all part of the human secondary thought creation about the divine creation, which is perfect, whole, and complete. But we have to know the truth and then a faithful witness to that truth. Once it starts to change what is appearing in your corporeal senses, now you're starting to see the meaning behind all of these scriptures.
Well, while I was listening to you, I was remembering that saying, if you think God is your co-pilot, you're in the wrong seat. Is that somewhat applicable to what you were just saying?
Yeah, I think it's, if God is your co-pilot, you're sitting in the wrong seat. Again, we want to come back to this one life. And then we want to get out of the belief in good and evil, right and wrong. We can't do that with our material senses. Our material senses work on contrast. They work in duality. To what I said earlier, if we are trying to find God with our five-sense mind, it's like trying to get your email with a calculator, but it's just not capable of doing it. It's not like God doesn't want us to have it some other way. There is no other way. We have to educate ourselves in how to develop these spiritual capacities. We find that before thought and above corporeal sense.
Speaking of movies, we were watching a movie a few nights ago. I believe it was called Mountaintop. And one of the main characters of the movie was an older gentleman. And what was really kind of amazing about this particular character is, he really feels that he does everything through grace, through God. And he calls God Papa in this case. At any rate, he just seemed so happy all the time, regardless of some of the dramas that was happening to him. What is your take on that?
Well, I think when you have that sense of connectedness to this inexhaustible resource, the perfection of being, there's no fear. And you have that objectivity that you can look at what is reporting in your corporeal senses and you see it as not real. Because your sense of self is totally established in that one divine life. And you're now under the protection of divine law. And like you say, when you live by grace, you find solutions that wouldn't have even occurred to you on a rational level of thinking.
So looking at that movie, for example, and the things that had transpired into that movie, so we know that's not real. It's not real life. So we have to take that same perception and apply that to what we're calling our life. Is that what I'm getting here?
Exactly. What we're calling life isn't life at all. What is life is perfect. Life is perfect. And all of these imperfections that I'm experiencing have to be understood as my thought about it. And for a lot of us, it's not even on a personal level. It's world thought being televised to you and then disguised as your thought. But we're hypnotized. As we give up the belief in the many and we start to understand life from the divine idea, that will shed light in our thought that will illumine our thought and reveal the divine creation to us.
Now, should we change how we think about our lives in the sense that when we watch a movie, we know nobody really gets hurt in the movie. Nothing really bad really happens. So do we have to take that same perception to our own life?
In a similar way, we know no one got hurt or killed filming the movie. All of the actors and actresses, after all of these scenes, they all walked away. And no one is hurt or killed on a material mental level of experience. As we start to graduate from thinking with our modes of mortal thinking into understanding life through the perspective of spiritual reality, we understand nobody's born, nobody dies. Spirit is the changeless state of being. Nothing ever needs to be added to it or taken away. And we rest and watch. We let that resolve things into thoughts and exchange the objects of sense for the divine idea, the perfection of being, without having to have that explained to you. Spirit testifies with deeds, not words. You want to prove the presence of the divine creation. You don't want to talk about it and try and academically defend it.
Swami, earlier you had mentioned the 5 material senses and the 7 spiritual capacities. I'd like to now take this opportunity to ask you, what are the 7 spiritual capacities? Could you review those for us?
Well, those would be your 7 chakras or the 7 churches in Revelation. It is that place in consciousness where human thought is the same as the divine idea. We have this revelation through what was called the Christ, the mind of Christ, where we find that place where we're out of time, we're out of space, we're out of concept, we're out of belief, we're not thinking. There's no personal will. There's no personal sense. Our mind is just programmed to receive, and we're letting the one divine creative principle express itself through us as us.
Great. Well, I think it's important that we go back to what you had talked about earlier, talking about this perfection. And I wonder if maybe you can review that with us again.
We start with the principle, there is no possibility that your life can be anything less than perfect. Perfection is the only life there is. This life is the life of the divine creative principle. And what we're trying to learn here is to accept it to be the only life I am. And in that accepting, surrendering of your personal will and without thinking, trying, striving, struggling, or planning, just letting this divine will guide you from within and reveal itself to you. Now that is what we would call thinking right.
I know that phrase, I am, is very important for our spiritual understanding. I believe Jesus, doesn't he say, before Abraham was, I am?
Yeah, I am is really the graduation from the belief in the many, the belief in duality, the belief in a separate self, the you. You give up you, and you understand that there is but one life, and it's perfect, whole, complete, right here, right now. And if there's only one, who am I? Who are you?
Well, we do have to start closing down our show for today, so listeners, be sure to visit the website www.ipdtransform.com. On the homepage, when you see the fading banner Blog Talk Radio, if you click that, that directs you to the Blog Talk Radio Show catalog page. And also clicking on the Products tab and Online Classes, that will direct you to the classes that Swami has available for you. So, Swami, do you have any of the final thoughts about today's program?
Well, I would like to encourage people to join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance to get the light in your soul and live with spiritual capacities. Namaste.
And thank you for listening to our program, The Voice of Yoga. This is Lisa Winton along with Swami and Jayananda signing off. Have a wonderful yoga kind of day. Namaste.